Hey guys, so here is our previous circuit, which of course is the disconnect. We used the manual starter, and then we used the cam switch in order to get a forward and reverse functionality on our motor. Okay? And so what I want to do now is essentially go to some actual motor control stuff. And I'll describe more about that in a minute. But basically what I want to do is I want to take a couple of other components, being this push button switch and this contactor, and I want to replace the manual starter with these two devices. Okay, so let's start with the switch. Okay, and so obviously we've got a couple of push buttons here. We've got some schematics, so we can see that the contacts 1 and 2 essentially deliver normally closed functionality. We can see that contacts 3 and 4 deliver normally open functionality, and essentially the same thing on the other switch. It's maybe worth taking a glance at the back side of this device. All right, and so really all I want to communicate here is that most of this stuff, these are connectors for our easy connections in the front, and here's some switches for essentially fault insertion. Again, that's beside the point. Here is the back side of the green switch. Here's the back side of the stop switch, the red switch, and you'll notice inside of here that you can see essentially green and red. Okay, this one also communicates that it's normally open. This one communicates that it's normally closed. And if you look closely, when I push the button, you should kind of be seeing three things move. One is the indicators here. At this location, and then the button, of course, here is pressing on those things. Okay, so that's the way that the contacts essentially make connection on those push button switches. All right, so that's that for a switch. That's pretty simple. Now our contactor, let's examine it a little bit. And so we have essentially our lines coming in, which are 1, 2, and 3. We have our lines going out, which are T1, 2, and 3. Okay, and then we have a normally open contact. These are all essentially, also normally open. But these are for carrying load. These are going to be load contacts. This one's an auxiliary contact. Okay, and so again, we can see that that these are indicated as normally open contact. All right, and so when this contactor closes, is energized, all of these contacts or switches basically are going to close. All right, and so what is it that does that? Well, that's going to be A1 and A2, and what is here, it'd be nice if there was a schematic here, but this is a coil. And so whenever we put voltage across A1 and A2, then this thing is going to activate. And if you look closely, there's a little button, sort of like the back side of the switch right there. And when we energize this thing, we're going to see that that coil pulls that down, makes the contacts. Okay, so I'm essentially doing that manually here, but we're going to do it in an energized way in just a moment. Okay, all right, so let's do the work as far as getting these things wired in. All right, so I know I'm taking the manual starter out, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave most of these kind of hanging, but I'm gonna just basically give them a yank. Okay. Now I like for things to go in a logical sequence, and so to my brain, what makes sense after our disconnect is essentially to do our push button. Okay, so let's slip that into place. That's going to go right here. Let's hook up our grounding connection to that device. Okay, I think logically what makes sense after that is gonna really frankly be the contactor. So let's move this cam switch slightly. All right, so here's our contactor, and we need to do the wiring for that. So again, I like to start with equipment grounding. Of course, equipment grounding does not show on the schematic, but there that connection is. Okay, and so we're going to have lines 1, 2, and 3. This is going to be delivering power to the motor, and what we're going to do is slip right over here to lines 1, 2, and 3 on the input position on this contactor. Okay, now I haven't done anything with the switches yet, but what I need to do is wire this thing such that it takes power. It really doesn't matter which one of these phases we do it from, and I'll do it differently in a future video, but this is to do it with minimal connections, okay? And so what I'm gonna do is, I think I'll just grab it right there at line 1. All right, so I'm going to go from line 1, and I want to use this switch in a normally open mode. That's the bottom set of contacts. So I'm going to go right here. Okay. And now what is it that I want to be energized whenever I close this contact? Well, the answer to that is going to be that I want to energize the coil on this contactor. Okay. Contact for that is going to be A1. All right, now we need one more thing, and that is essentially from the back side of this contactor. I need that to go to neutral, okay? Recall that when we go from line to line, we're dealing with 208 volts, okay? But when I go from a line to neutral, then I'm only dealing with 100 volts. This is 120 volts. This is a 120 volt device, and so I need to go to neutral. So there's that connection, okay? Now, the only thing that's left is to put our cam switch back in. Okay, so here is line 3. I'm going to grab that from T3 of the contactor. Here is line 2 for our cam switch. I'm going to grab that from T2 on our contactor. Here is line 1 from the cam switch, and I'm going to grab that from T1 on our contactor. Okay, so let's see. I brought this device in and I didn't hook up the equipment grounding. Let's get that real quick. Okay, there we go. All right, so from a wiring perspective, we should be in good shape. So now let's fire this thing up and see if that was in fact all it took to get more proper motor control. And also, since we've got the cam switch in there, we still have forward and reverse functionality. Okay. All right. So I'm going to power on the power supply. I'm going to power on at the lockout module. Okay. Currently, my cam switch is in the stop position. I'm going to leave it there for my first little hit. Okay. And so I'm going to push the green button. Okay. Now we do hear something happening, and hopefully you can see right here that the button that I talked about a minute ago is in fact closing. Okay, so you can see that is opening and closing when I press and release the button. Okay, that's a good indication that we're on track. Okay, let's switch the cam switch to the forward position. Let's give our green button a hit. Okay, and I don't have the camera set in quite the right place at this moment. I guess I can relocate it quickly. All right, so just like before, we have counterclockwise rotation. Let's switch our cam switch to the reverse direction. Let's give our start button a little hit. Okay, and so obviously our motor is now spinning in the clockwise direction. Okay, so that was pretty easy to switch this from being a manual started thing to something that we can control with a push button and a contactor. Okay?